Hi, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with Arick Goomanovsky, who is the co-founder and chief business officer of Ermetic. Arick, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Great. Arick, we're going to talk a little bit about trends and entitlements and cloud, lot of interesting topics. But before we get started, give us a couple of minutes on Ermetic. It'll be helpful for people to know what your company does.
Sure, absolutely. Ermetic is a cloud security solution. And what we do is help organizations govern identities and manage entitlements in public cloud infrastructure. So basically, we help organizations that are using public cloud infrastructure such as Amazon Web Services, AWS, or the Microsoft Azure platform, or the Google platform, and others, govern the identity they have in those environments and manage and mitigate identity-related risks.
Do you find that where public cloud at one point was sort of an add-on, is it becoming more pretty mainstream to enterprise security architecture and just enterprise computing? What's been your observation there?
Yes, absolutely. So for many years, public cloud was something people would talk about, but the conversation would at the level of a debate or a conversation. Um, in my previous company, I was doing a lot of cybersecurity services in North America in general, and the United States in particular, supporting Fortune 500 organizations across coast to coast, and most of them did not have any presence in the public cloud. I remember a debate with one of the largest consumer packaged goods players in the United States and globally that were thinking about the public cloud. They were really concerned with the third-party risk, right? Because you're putting your infrastructure in the hand of others. And I remember the argument we made to them at that point, and we were very supportive of that transition. And the argument we were able to make is that, look, it's not that you don't have third-party risk today. You do have that because, for example, all your on-prem infrastructure is supported by HP. So you're already putting your infrastructure in the hand of others. You're just putting that into the hands of someone else. You're improving your cost structure. And frankly, you guys are good in making juices and water and whatnot, but you're probably not as good in securing and managing your infrastructure. So why don't you let someone who's professional in that take care of that part and focus on your key function as a company? And I think many organizations have over the past few years have taken on this idea, and over the last year that we've been started selling the Ermetic platform, I was astonished by the process that organizations were able to achieve over just the past few years. Every large-scale organization you talk to, they have a plan of public cloud adoption, sometimes even full public cloud migration. We all know about Capital One that just tweeted that they've shut down their last server in the on-prem environment. They're fully in the public cloud today. But you speak to large organizations, all of them have KPIs to have 20, 30, 40, 80% of their infrastructure in the public cloud by the end of next year. And in addition to that, we also have all the new companies, all the new age companies that were founded in the past, let's say 10 years. Most of them never had anything on-prem to begin with. So I'm talking about SaaS vendors, I'm talking about e-commerce players. They never had any on-prem infrastructure. They were kind of born in the cloud. These organizations are super cloud native, and they don't even know what on-prem really is, right? So that's definitely, public cloud is definitely a thing, and it's going to be just bigger and bigger as we go on.
Now, you founded the company relatively recently. I'm going to guess, I'll let you fill in the blanks here, that when you noticed issues with identity, and in particular security related issues, probably I'm going to guess that prompted some thought around how that might be solved. Take us through the thinking there. What was the impetus for creating the company? What problems are you guys trying to solve?
Right. So we're lucky in a sense that the founding team of Ermetic, we're all repeat entrepreneurs. We've all founded pretty successful cybersecurity companies before that was acquired by key players like Microsoft or Palo Alto Networks and the likes. And being experienced co-founders, what we were able to do is to do a lot of research. So even before founding Ermetic, we conducted a large survey of 300 US-based CISOs and public cloud practitioners, asking them about the challenges they are facing with public cloud security. And it was both surprising and not, frankly, that many of these practitioners, or actually all of them, told us that identity and access management is a big thing in public cloud security, and that they see a lot of failures being a result of the challenges they're facing as practitioners in properly managing identity and access in those types of environments. And we started digging deeper into that problem, trying to understand what's actually caused that. And the reason is very simple. In the on-prem environment, identity used to be kind of the small child in the family. But when organizations have started moving to the public cloud, in many settings or architectural settings, identity became what is known today as the only perimeter. You hear that a lot. Identity, the only perimeter in the cloud. It's of course not the only perimeter, but in many cases, it is. So once you have the right identity, you can access all the resources anywhere in the world from any point on the globe. Which makes identity way more important than it used to be on-prem, where probably networking was the king and then endpoint security and identity only after that. And so we understand that the importance of the identity and identity security went up tremendously in the public cloud, but also the complexity of managing identities went up because you have a proliferation of identities. You have much more identity than you used to have on-prem, because in addition to all the, the human identity that you have, that this subset in itself has grown, because in addition to the administrators, you have all the developers that connect and live in to the public cloud infrastructure and live within those environments. You also have another set of machine identities that scale up and down dynamically in public cloud. So it's becoming a huge chaos. So the complexity of governing those identities shoots up, and when you have both more complexity on one hand and increased importance on the other, the result is obviously many more failures and many more security breaches. And with that understanding, we actually decided to found Ermetic and help organizations address those issues at scale and automatically.
That's great. I mean, I totally agree on the complexity issue. I would say that when you draw the graph, as complexity goes up, security goes down. It's no question about it. Now, a term that a lot of people watching us in this discussion are starting to hear is entitlement. It comes up all the time. Analysts use it. We see it in a lot of research articles and reports. Help me understand, is entitlement the same as identity? Is it just a new term? How does it sort of relate to cloud? How should people think about that concept of an entitlement?
Right. So this concept, I think, the plain English word that we use for that would be a permission. But permissions are so they're usually tied, permissions are tied to identities and basically determine what this identity can do or cannot do within an application or across an infrastructure, right? We use the term permission, traditionally when it comes to applications. What are your permissions in terms of data access within an application and whatnot? So I think that the analyst coined this term entitlements to emphasize that we're talking about the infrastructure permission. So if I'm an administrator, can I, in public cloud, spin up or down resources, right? I can turn on virtual machines, I can turn on buckets, storage services, I can turn on databases or turn them off. I can configure my network differently. All of those are entitlements of that specific administrator. You might have an application running on a virtual machine, and this application is required to access storage or a database, right? And therefore, it should have the identity that belongs to that application should have the entitlement to read or write to that storage or database, right? So you can think of those as permission that pertain to the public cloud infrastructure.
That makes good sense. Now let's talk very practically. You're chief business officer, so you're talking to customers, I'm sure, every day. But for people watching, they probably have their existing mess, right? As you referenced earlier, some IAM vendor, a bunch of Active Directory, all kinds of authentication and authorization procedures and hybrid cloud, the usual mess.
Right.
When you sit down with them, what's your advice and how can they make use of what you guys do? Are you replacing something? Are you augmenting? How do you normally speak to clients? Now's a good time to give some free advice.
Sure, absolutely, happy to. So I think, first of all, our message that many security failures in the public cloud infrastructure happen as a result of IAM is surprise to some users or practitioners, because many people come to the public cloud with the precondition they have from on-prem, where networking was very important. So everyone works kind of to secure their network properly, but then you have those resources that are exposed to the internet or to any identity in the internet, like open buckets or storage services and whatnot, and you cannot screen those via network because they don't live in your network. They live outside. They live with the cloud service provider, with Azure or with AWS or with Google. So first is, what we tell our customers is, folks, you have to understand that IAM is a thing in the public cloud, and IAM security is very, very important. Maybe even more important than networking. Sure, not less important. And this is something you should be addressing, and you should be aware of that. The second part is you should be able to quantify the IAM security risk you hold, right? This is very important, right? Because unless you can quantify the risk, there is no way you can improve, because you cannot set KPIs, you cannot measure improvement, you cannot build processes around that technology, whatever technology you're using, you have to be able to quantify. Now, in order to be able to quantify, you have to know your identities, right? You have to know these are all my identities that have access to my public cloud infrastructure, whether those human identities or machine identities. There is a discovery phase. Then there is a visibility phase, because you taking those identities, you have to understand what permissions they have, what they can access. Are they privileged? Are they not privileged? Can they read data broadly? Can they modify infrastructure in the environment? Can they escalate their privileges or give permissions to other identities? All this is very important. Which are admins, which are not admins, right? So getting the visibility into all your identities, understanding which are privileged, and then trying to understand if there are any risks related to these identities, right? If these identities tomorrow can be compromised. So for example, if you have an admin user in your AWS environment or in your Azure environment, and this admin is not protected with a multi-factor authentication, and tomorrow could be compromised, that's not a good thing, because if this user is compromised, all your environment is exposed, everything. But this is kind of the most basic example. Then you have more sophisticated examples. Let's say you have an application identity. It belongs to a machine that uses this identity to access resources in the environment. Is that machine exposed to the internet or not, right? Because if this machine is exposed to the internet, it could tomorrow be compromised, and with that, the identity of that application. And this is, in a nutshell, the story of the Capital One breach that happened over a year ago and was a big thing, and probably one of the biggest cloud security breaches ever, right? They had a publicly exposed machine that had also a privileged identity within the environment. So understanding what are the risks that are relating to your privileged identities is very important, right? And this is the process that we are actually helping our customers to build, right? First, discover your identities and get the visibility of who has access to what, understand what identities are privileged, and then the analytics part, where we help you understand what are the risks that are threatening kind of your privileged identities. Maybe you have a privileged identity that is over-provisioned. It has permissions it should not have to begin with, and then you could remove those permissions. So we look at all those risks, and we actually help our customers to automatically remediate that. So enable MFA, reduce excessive permissions, disconnect from external facing applications, and so on and so forth. And through this process, we're actually allowing the customer to minimize its IAM risk. And with that, to minimize the chance, dramatically minimize the chance for a major security failure in their public cloud infrastructure.
I mean, is least privilege sort of the guiding kind of concept here, the guiding principle? Because ultimately we're just trying to, you've said minimize a couple of times. If you had to boil it all down, is that what we're trying to do? Just minimize and properly align?
Right. So I think we're trying to minimize the risk. And of course, the way to minimize the risk, let's just think about a privileged identity you have. Any privileged identity, there are two ways you can minimize its risk. Either you protect the identity better, so you enforce MFA, you make sure it's not on a publicly exposed machine or whatnot, and many other things. You watch for anomalies to be able to detect if it's compromised in real time and whatnot. And the other thing that you can do you can minimize its privileges, right? You can remove some of the privileges, and by doing that, you are kind of reducing the sensitivity of that identity. Because if this identity is admin, but it does not require admin privileges, and you can remove all the sensitive permissions, you make it an identity which is less important. And if it's tomorrow compromised, the blast radius will not be as huge, right? So there are two ways you can do. You can either minimize the threats to that identity, or you can minimize its kind of inherent risk by removing unused and excessive permissions. And this is the process you're referring to as list privilege, right? So first of all, list privilege, because let's make sure that the privileged identities are actually have to be privileged, and then monitor for all the threats you have on those privileged identities and minimize them as possible.
So I think you've given a very good sort of overview of the current state. Let's take out our crystal ball here. Let's think a little bit about the next year or two. It feels like pandemic is going to continue at least for a while. You and I are filming this at the end of 2020. What do you expect? Is this becoming a bigger problem for typical enterprises? They do more in cloud. What do you foresee in the next year or two here? Is this a growing problem?
Absolutely. This is, I think this issue is growing exponentially, and there are a couple of things that are driving that. So first of all, of course, the pandemic has grown the cloud adoption in general. SaaS, but also infrastructure and platform as a service, because the SaaS companies are running on public cloud infrastructure. So there is more public cloud infrastructure in use. Now, people work from home, right? So they do not connect from their data center anymore. So you have more people that connect externally to your public cloud infrastructure, and you have to manage their entitlements. Again, we're going back to that important term, and making sure that these people, these users, these administrators, these developers have access only to the information they require is paramount, right? This is the process of list privilege we talked about. But of course, this complexity, all this, remote working, work from home, bigger adoption of public cloud also creates complexity. And complexity, as we established, that creates risk for security failures. So by achieving this privilege, by minimizing those risks, you also reduce dramatically the complexity. So, if I have to guess what's going to happen in a year from now, we're going to be hearing more and more about, security failures in the public cloud. Many of those would be caused by IAM challenges organizations are facing. And with that, adoption of technologies like Ermetic that help organizations resolve some of those risks around IAM in the public cloud infrastructure.
I would imagine that'll also extend in the next year or two to audit and compliance, right? Because people are one of the problems of being a CISO is you have to stop audit, you have to stop attacks, but you also have to stop bad audits. So for people from that community, I suspect they're going to be hunting around this area a little bit more in the next couple of years. Have you seen that with the compliance?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And this is a very good point, because, a basic question in compliance, if you have, let's say, a database of customers and you have their PII in there, it doesn't matter if it's CCPA or GDPR, the basic requirement that you have to prove is that you can audit, and you can, and at any point in time, tell the auditor who has access to that resource, right? This is super, super basic. This is not even a security question. Understanding who has access to your resources is not a security question. It's a first step in security, but it's also a first step in compliance. And this has increasingly become a challenge in public cloud infrastructure. If I take an AWS environment, even a small one, with a storage service there, what we all know is a S3 bucket, right? And I ask the user, can you tell me what are all the identities that have access to that bucket? Very few organizations would be able to kind of give the answer off the cuff. This is a pretty challenging question, and this is a super, super basic question in compliance environments, right? So definitely compliance is a strong push in terms of securing identity and governing identities in public cloud infrastructure.
Well, Arick, I want to thank you so much for taking some time today to share. It'll be interesting to see as we go into 2021 how accurate your points are. I suspect they'll be right on the money. This is an important area, and on behalf of my team at Tag Cyber and also the people watching, really appreciate all your guidance. Very, very helpful.
Sure, Ed. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure speaking to you, and we'll circle back in a year and we'll see if my predictions were correct or not.
That's great. In the meantime, I assume the website, the Ermetic website, would be the right place for people to be in touch with your team.
Absolutely, absolutely. We would encourage everyone to come over and ask their questions, and we're here to answer and help.
Very good. Well, Arick, thanks once again. And for everyone else watching, we'll see you next time.